Hello, welcome to the ITIM sponsored Excel training. This training today is going to be touching on the topics of just little tiny tips that might help you get through Excel faster, how to filter, and how to use pivot tables. If you didn't already see this, the desktop version is recommended to the point where probably you won't be able to do this if you're not using the desktop version. Some of these features don't exist in the online version. So let's dig in. The first thing I want to talk about is raw data. In order to do any of the stuff we're talking about today, your data has got to be in unaggregated form, raw data form. What that means is each row represents an individual thingy that you're taking measurements on. And each column is a measurement on that thingy. It's a variable. Database people call them fields. In almost every Cricut report, there's going to be a page called details that will have raw data. And I think you guys have had plenty of experience running reports, but when we do the actual training, there may be some people who haven't yet. So I just want to quickly talk about how to get a report. The example data set we're going to be using is report 1001 in patient care coordination. And if you want to run this report in Cricut, you go to reports and downloads, reporting services. Then you search for the report name, 1001. When you find inpatient care coordination, you hit run report. Don't be doing this right now, by the way. I don't expect you to be doing this. But you would hit run report. It's giving you some choices about what parameters you can fill in. In this example today, we're going to be doing all affiliates, and we're going to be doing hospitalizations between 10/1/18 and 5/6/21. Now, because I'm going to be showing this on the screen, I don't want to be flashing Medicaid IDs. A de-identified and also simplified version of the data set that you get from this has been saved here. Everybody needs to save a local copy of this on your machine, if you haven't already, and put it on your desktop or wherever you save these things. So I'm just going to go over how to do that really quick. Oh, for goodness sake, am I not going to get... I thought there was a link. Good to know. So you can go over to... All right, so this isn't working. Here's how you get it. You go to the... Wait a minute. Can you guys...
No.
Ow.
No, we were supposed to use our imaginations, I thought.
Oh, good grief. Okay, I was talking about this.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Here we go.
All
I thought it was a
right,
test.
try again. It was not a test. It was a test of me and I failed. So a de-identified, simplified version of this data set has been saved here. There's a quick link to that. If you go to this calendar appointment for what we're doing right now. So I'm going to show you, if you haven't already done it, a good way to just save this a local copy. So training data set, I'm going to click that link. Open. And it is really important that you don't save over the original. I don't know if I have the option to make it so you can't, so just don't, please. So go to File, Save As, and then save it on your desktop or wherever. Good?
Yes.
Okay. So now would be a good time, now that you have, I hope, if you didn't just do that little exercise, please do open the file.
Okay.
This de-identified and simplified version. And the configuration you're going to want on your machine is one window with Teams, where you can see my screen, and one window with Excel, where you can see the data set. And I'm going to be demonstrating and showing things out of the notes on Teams, and you're going to be working alongside in your Excel window. Is that clear? Should I say that a different way?
No, I got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you send, with the invite, are you going to send out a little blurb on just how to do that in case folks can't remember? Otherwise, I'll
Oh.
probably interrupt you like I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, no, I was not going to, but now I am.
Okay. Do
Do
you
you
remember?
have a ready-made blurb?
I don't, but I can give you one.
If it's no trouble, then yeah.
I'll give you a couple bullets and you can throw that on the appointment. And you could even reference back to that appointment and that it's in the body of the message.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, so as I said, we need the data to be in raw form, and let me just show you why this particular example is in raw form, because each row represents a thingy we're taking a measurement on. In this case, those thingies are hospitalizations. This row is one hospitalization. This row is another hospitalization. This row is a third hospitalization, and so on. And then what we see in the columns, these variables are measurements we're taking on each hospitalization. And when I say measurement, measurements don't have to be things like height and weight. It's just basically anything that you want to jot down about that thingy. So the race of the person who was hospitalized, whether they were Hispanic, their age when they were admitted, and so on. All of the variables are described in the data dictionary on this last sheet of that Excel file, but we're not going to go through all of them today. I just want to take a minute to look at the variables that we're going to be using and make sure we all understand what's going on. So again, each row is a hospitalization. What are the variables of interest today? First of all, case number. This is the consumer's Cricket ID. This is fake. But it does align with a real person. So for example, this first hospitalization was patient 1. Second hospitalization was patient 2. Third was patient 3. Fourth was patient 4. And then the next 3 hospitalizations are all, no, sorry, the next 4 hospitalizations are all the same guy. That is true. I'm just not telling you who it is. But
Okay.
anyway, this does represent which person it is that was hospitalized. Another variable we're going to be working with is last Medicaid health plan. This is the last Medicaid health plan that paid for a service according to the Care Connect 360 extract. The reason this is important is because this data set, inpatient care coordination with whom? Coordination with them. That's what it's all about. We're coordinating care for these consumers with their Medicaid health plan. For each hospitalization, we have the authorization effective date. This is not always the same thing as the admission date, but it's pretty close. We also have the CSR discharge date. This is when somebody goes to leave the hospital, staff will fill out the end of episode continued stay review form, CSR, continued stay review. And in that form, they put the day that the person walked out of the hospital, which is the discharge date. So that's one of our variables. Another thing they put into the documentation upon discharge is who this person is being discharged to. In this case, they may be discharged to the CMH that authorized the service, or they might be discharged to a different CMH, not the one that authorized the service, but some other CMH, or they might be discharged somewhere else, neither of the above. We also have CMH familiarity, and this is to what extent was this consumer familiar with the CMH system? Take on 3 values. One is if they were open to a CMH team the day before they were admitted, then it says already open to a CMH at admission. If they were open to a CMH team within 1 week after they were discharged, then it says open to a CMH by week after discharge. If none of the above, then it says not open to a CMH team a week after discharge. And now we get to sort of the meat of this. The thing we're trying to coordinate with the Medicaid health plans is the follow-up. And it's not just any old follow-up. We are trying to get follow-up that meet criteria for a HEDIS measure, whose acronym is FUH. So in this variable, it shows any service that happened within the 30 days after discharge, but it only lists the ones that meet criteria for HEDIS. And we'll be talking about this a lot today, and I'll be talking about HEDIS follow-ups. So that's this. let me just flash the data set real quick. Oops. Looks like this. So this person had a follow-up service, procedure code 90853 with the place of service is 11 on this day, da 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 da. This person had a HEDIS follow-up. The next one is non-HEDIS follow-up. This is services that occurred within the 30 days after discharge, which do not qualify for a HEDIS. This is just for internal data. The state doesn't use it, but it is sort of curious to know, well, did anything happen if they didn't have a HEDIS follow-up? And it has the same format. Just basically, if something's written in there, they had one, a non-HEDIS follow-up. And the last thing is the discharge fiscal year. This is the fiscal year in which they were discharged according to the continued stay review. So I hope that that's enough to sort of get an understanding of what this data set is all about, because we're going to be using it for this whole training. If you would now go to the hospitalizations during period sheet in Excel, and we're going to start learning some Excel stuff. When you get a data set, one of the first things you might want to know is the size of that data set, which means how many rows are there. There's a lot of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you one. If you would please click on cell B3, which is the first case number in the data set. Now hold down Control and Shift and at the same time, and then click the down arrow. This is one of those little tips I was talking about. This will highlight everything between where you had your mouse and the next, or sorry, the next non-blank, the last non-blank value. Ugh, I didn't say that well. Highlights everything in the column. On the bottom of the screen, when you do that, it's going to tell you some basic statistics on all the cells that you have highlighted. And what it's telling you is count 4844. That means you've highlighted 4,844 values. So that's the size of your data set. There are 4,844 hospitalizations in the data set. Are there any questions about this so far?
No.
Okay, pipe right in if there are. Here's another way to hop around the screen. I'd like you to go back to B3, to that first cell we were in. You could do that by scrolling all afternoon, but a much faster way is up at the very top above column A, there's something called the name box. If you type in the address of where you want to go, just type in B3, enter, you'll immediately be brought to cell B3. And now here's another little trick that I use all day long, every day. This time from cell B3, click Control and down arrow, but don't do the shift. What this does is the same as that earlier trick, except it doesn't highlight. So it just brings you immediately to the last non-blank value. And you can zip around the screen super fast this way. So I'm going to just quickly show. So Control down arrow, I'm at the bottom. Control up arrow, I'm at the top. Control right arrow, I'm at the right. Control left arrow. You can get to where you want to go much faster than scrolling around all day long. Any questions about that?
No.
Thank you. Here's another thing that's really handy when you're looking at an Excel raw data set. If you scroll down, you see, oh, the date of something is 11/10/2019, but what is it? I don't even know what the column headings are anymore. There's a way to make it so that the headings stay still. So to do that, put your cursor, click on cell C3. I'll show you why this cell in a minute. It is important that you pick a specific cell though. So click on C3, then go to View, like up here, this ribbon, Freeze Panes, there, and then just choose the Freeze Panes. When you do this, it freezes everything above and to the left of where you set your cursor. So for example, now I'm going to do it really quick. If I'm in C3 and I go to View, Freeze Panes, I can scroll down and I still see the column headings, and I can scroll right and I can still see the affiliate and the case number.
Oh, okay. So that's why you chose C3.
Yes, because I could have done B3, but then I just would have seen the affiliate. I did C3 because case number is the kind of thing I'm probably going to want to see.
Okay.
Now let's talk about filtering. I bet that you guys already know how to do this, but bear with me. If you're looking for specific records, you can scroll through the data, but it is much quicker to put a filter on your columns. So that's what we're going to do. Click anywhere in the data set. It doesn't have to be anywhere specific. Then go to Data, Filter. Excel should be smart enough by this time to know what your data set is composed of and know where the column headings are. And when you do that, you should now see little drop downs by each variable name. So let's say that we are in a meeting with United, trying to coordinate care with our shared consumers. So let's say we just want to see United consumers. Then you would click the drop down by last Medicaid health plan. They're in column F. And you don't even have to type in the whole word United. In the search here under text filter, if you just start typing UNI, it automatically knows, oh, you must mean United. You don't even have to go any farther. You can just click OK. Okay, so I have data, filter, and last Medicaid health plan. UNI, that's it. I just hit OK. Now I'm only seeing United. Filters are more than just a way to pull certain records. It also is an exploratory tool you can use to look for suspicious records or just basic information like the shape of your data set. For example, if I am already clicked on United, it would be sort of hard to find out who's the youngest person in this data set. But if I click age at admission, it's giving me all the possible values in sorted order. So I can immediately know that the youngest person in the data was 7, who we share with United. So go ahead and find the youngest person who we share with United. That is click, hit select all to uncheck, and hit 7. And notice it's 2 people. So when it showed you a 7 there in that dropdown, that doesn't mean there's one 7-year-old. That means 7 exists in the data set. It's only going to show you the unique values and it's going to put them in order. Very handy.
Okay, great.
So a lot of times once you've started clicking and filtering, you just want it to go back the way it was. To reset it, to get rid of all the filters, you go to the same place where you saw filter and right next to it, it says clear. So hit clear. And I just want to demonstrate one really quick thing before we move on. If I look at the drop down by age at admission right now, the youngest person is 6, not 7. And the reason for that is these filters work cumulatively. So I had already filtered for United before. Now it's only giving me the values that exist within what I've already got filtered.
Oh.
So that's another thing that can help you understand what exists and what doesn't exist in your data set. You can also use this to find suspicious data, like I said before. And as an example of that, head over to the CSR discharge date, right here, column K, and filter it so that you're only seeing blanks. You're only seeing hospitalizations with a blank discharge date. So you would uncheck everything and only check blanks. Some of these, that makes perfect sense because this was hospitalizations. The report was run on 5/6, and like this person, they were authorized on 5/4. That means they're still in the hospital. They literally have not been discharged. But some of these do not make sense. And I can actually just hit the drop down for auth effective date and see what dates exist in there. I'm seeing stuff all the way down to 2017. I don't have to scroll through to see that that exists. I just need to use the drop down. And that doesn't make sense.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So that is showing us then that we have people that have not completed the discharge in our system. Is that correct?
Don't know. I don't know. I'm
Oh.
gonna, okay, so I'm gonna address that exact thing.
Okay.
That's exactly the right question.
Oh.
So here's an exercise to make sure that you guys got the stuff that we've already gone over. So here's what I would like. I'm going to give you, it's like, don't worry if you don't finish it, but I'm going to give you 3 minutes sort of to yourself with your own thoughts to try to do this. And then I'm going to come in and do it. Use filters to find consumers who have a blank discharge date. We just did that. But whose authorization date is 2020 or before. So basically not 2021. And tell me how many admissions there are like this. Hint, that was the first thing we did when we started looking at Excel. How many? So it's 128. I'll come back at 131. Okay, ready or not, here we go. All right, so first, blank discharge date. We already did that. Now we want an auth effective date that's 2020 or before. So I'm clicking the drop down and I'm just getting rid of the 2021. This gives me 2020 and everything before. I'm hitting OK. And then to answer the question, how many? Put your cursor in the top value. Excuse me. Then hold down Control Shift down arrow. And when you do that at the very bottom of the page, it gives you 128. Did anybody get that?
Yes, I did.
You did.
I'm such a child.
You did great. Then, okay, so then the next question is exactly what you asked, Teresa, like what's going on? This is an important thing, actually. What do you do if you come across weird issues in a Cricut report? The first thing you do always is go to the front end and see if that's actually what was entered. So like, right, this report doesn't have real case numbers, but in the real report, there are case numbers. So you go to the front end and see, is that what was actually there? Because if so, then it's a clinical issue, it's a training issue, it's not a Cricut reports issue.
Okay.
But if it is on the front end, then please, it's hugely helpful to me if you just say, I only need one example. Case number, blah, 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 has a discharge date for their admission on such and such date, but it's not showing up in the report. And if you give me one example, that's usually enough for me to debug from, and it saves so much time if I have an example. One example is infinitely better than zero.
Okay.
So that's what you do. First check the front end, and if the front end is not matching the report, then give your example to me, please. I'll be super grateful. Okay. Next, creating custom columns, variables with functions. This is nice and helpful. Sorry, I'm going to undo it. This is nice and helpful knowing, oh, there was a procedure that happened on there that met HEDIS standards and so on. But it's not going to be very easy to turn this into a percentage, like a rate, in the form that it's in. Usually if you have data like this, you're going to have to do something like what I'm showing you now. We're going to make a new variable in the data set called numerator, and it's going to take on a 1 if they should be in the numerator. That, in other words, if they have something in this column, and a 0 if they don't. So first thing, we're going to make a space for that new variable, right click the V in column V. And when you do that, you're going to see an option to insert. And once you do that, now you've got an empty column right there between CMH familiarity and HEDIS FA. Give it a name. The reason for this is later when we do pivot tables, it won't read in anything that doesn't have a column heading. So you do have to make sure to put that name there. And we're just going to call it numerator. So this is how you would type in the function. We're just first going to get the value either 1 or 0 for the first person, for the first hospitalization with a formula, and then we're going to copy that formula down. So let's work on the first person. Every Excel formula works like this. You start with an equals sign, and then you enter your formula. So in this case, because we're saying, well, if that other column has something, then this, we're actually using in English the words we need to use if. This is an if then kind of situation. So that's why we're using if. So right there in what cell is that? That would be V3. Type in equals if left paren. Right there. And if you don't see this prompt that Excel is giving you saying, oh yeah, I know that function, then something's gone wrong. You should see the prompt. Now the next thing we're going to type in is something to tell whether there was text written in that heat is fa column. We're going to do that is type ISTEXT left paren is text. And then you're going to use your mouse and click on cell, what would that be? W3. When you do that, Excel's going to automatically fill in the address of what you clicked. So when you're done with this step, it's going to say equals if left paren is text left paren W3. Now type right paren and a comma. And what this statement means so far, if we were to translate it into English, is if there's text in cell W3, then that's what that translates to. And you can see in the prompt, it's telling you what to put next. It's saying, what do you want to happen if what you just said is true? What we want to happen is for there to be a 1. And so type a 1 and a comma. And now the prompt is telling you it wants to know what should happen if that logical test is false. We want a 0. So type 0 and then finish it with a right paren.
Oh, okay.
And the finish statement, this. If left paren is text, left paren, W3, right paren, comma, 1, comma, 0, right paren. Then hit enter to finalize that equation. And you
Oh,
should,
I'm sorry. I have a question.
yeah,
I received an error. It said you've entered too many arguments for this function.
that means you have an extra comma.
Oh, okay.
How-
Oh, you're right. I do.
yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, look at that. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
That's
Come
why
on.
she's teaching the class.
So you should see a 0 there when you hit enter, and that makes sense because there's no text in W3. If there's a text, then you would get a 1, but there's not. I'll just do that really quick. So now the next step is we've filled it in for one row, but we need to fill it in for all the rows. And the way you're going to do, you could do Control C and Control V, but that's really tedious. A much quicker way, if you hover your mouse right near the bottom right-hand corner of that cell, it'll turn. Do you see how it turned from a fat white cross to a skinny black cross? As soon as you see the skinny black cross, double click and it'll fill the whole column up. So Excel has gotten much smarter at this kind of thing over the years. It uses the surrounding data to determine how far down to paste it. It's usually right, but sometimes it's wrong. So you do want to check that that worked. So what you'll do is just eyeball it, run down and make sure it stops at the end of the data set. Yes, it did. And just sort of make sure when it says 1, that's when there's something written there. When it says 0, not. And that's how you add a variable. So 1s and 0s, that sounds really robot-y. Why use 1s and 0s instead of yeses and no? There's a really good reason for it. The answer is if you're ever going to be trying to figure out the percent of the cases that had a yes, the percent of cases that were in the numerator, 1s and 0s will get you there much faster than a bunch of letters like Y and N. Like if you highlight that numerator column like we did when we first opened the data set, look at the statistics on this. It says the count is 4844. That's old news. We knew that. The sum is 2577. The sum is how many ones there were. Does that make sense? I never know how far to go with this concept because it absolutely was a mind blow when I first learned it, and I feel like I want to put a fine point on this. Every time that we're there in the numerator, there's a 1. And so if you add up a bunch of 1s, that tells you how many times someone was in the numerator. So the sum, there were 2,577 of those hospitalizations had a HEDIS follow-up. That's what that's saying. And even better than that, the percent that had a HEDIS follow-up, that would be the number that had a HEDIS follow-up over the total. Well, that's right there, the average. If you take the average of a bunch of 1s and 0s, that tells you the percent of the total that was a yes. Doing this calculation would have been much more complicated and ugly if we had used yeses and nos instead of 1s and 0s. And that's why in a lot of data sets that you get, you'll see things coded as 1s and 0s just to make life easier. You can always just click on that column and see how many yeses there were without really any trouble at all. And it's not just easy when you're doing simple stats, it makes it custom made for putting things into graphs and charts and tables, which we'll get to in a second. Exercise. This is going to be another 3-minute one. That was 142. You're going to do the exact same thing, except you're going to make a variable instead of numerator. It's going to be called numerator light. And this one, it's the same idea, except it uses non-HEDIS FA. So there's a 1 if there's something written in the non-HEDIS FA, something written in column X, and it's a 0 otherwise. So it's 143 now. I will pop back at 146 and show how to do this. Okay, it's 1:46. Does anyone need more time, or are you okay with me going over the solution?
I'm okay. I feel bad. I'm the only one answering, guys.
I know. Hey, guys, wake up.
No, I'm here. Go ahead.
Okay, it is pretty important that that you do this with me if you didn't get it, because we're going to be using this variable, both of these, as we come. So I'm highlighting column W by right-clicking over the letter W. I'm hitting insert to put a column right there.
I did that.
And then name it numerator light. And the formula is equals IF is text, this thing,
Yes. Okay.
right paren, comma, 1. If yes, then 1, otherwise, comma, 0, right paren. When you hit enter, you see the value for the first row. Then I click on that cell and I hover near the bottom right until my big fat white cross turns into a skinny black cross. And double click, and it fills in the entire column. Now it's saying filter your data so numerator light equals 1. What kinds of things are you seeing in the non-HEDIS FA column? So I'm going to do that. And this is another way you can check that your formula worked. If I look at just numerator equals 1, numerator light equals 1, I should only see for non-HEDIS FA something filled in. And you could scroll through, but a much quicker way is to hit his drop down and see, are there any blanks? Nope. So the answer is, what do you see? You see something written in non-HEDIS FA. Now let's filter for numerator, the next number 3. Filter your data so numerator light equals 0. Now what kinds of things are you seeing for non-HEDIS FA?
All blanks.
And yes, all blanks. And so you should. And you can tell it's everything blank without having to scroll by hitting the drop down, and that's the only thing that exists. That means our formula worked. I'm going to clear my filter there. The last question, what % of hospitalizations had a non-HEDIS follow-up? You know how to do that? Ooh. So since this is coded as a 1 when they had a non-HEDIS follow-up and a 0 otherwise, all we have to do is highlight all those cells, and the average will give us our answer. So I'm going to click on this top one in cell W3 and hold down Control, Shift, down arrow, and that'll highlight everything. And at the bottom of the screen, mine is way too small for you to see, but it says 71.9%.
Okay.
Any questions about this so far? Okay.
No, I don't.
Well. Okay, so let's get busy with pivot tables. So like what we've done so far, you know, a single average, a single sum, that's fine. But usually we want to expand it much more, like by affiliate, or we want to slice and dice the data. And you can do this with formulas, but it is way easier to use pivot tables. So to do that, you click anywhere in your data set, in your raw data set, and then go to Insert, Pivot Table.
Insert.
You'll get a screen that says Create Pivot Table with all the selections. Leave the defaults and hit OK. And when you do that, now you see the canvas that you're going to work on. On the left, this is right now it's blank pivot table. This is where all the output is going to show up. And on the right, in the pivot tables fields pane, on the top, you see the variables that you can use. These are just those column headings for our raw data set. And what you do to make your pivot tables, you drag stuff out of this top box into one of these 4 bottom boxes. You would drag to the bottom right anything that you wanted to add up or take the average of or count or whatever statistic you want to be working with. That's what goes in values. In the grouping variable, in the columns or rows box, that's where you would drag things that you want to be grouping variables. And if you want to filter your analysis for just certain kinds of records, you would use the filters box. It's much easier to show this than it is to explain it, so let's just dive right in. In your pivot table fields pane, find numerator, which is that variable we made, which is a 1 if they had a HEDIS follow-up and a 0 otherwise. Drag that down to the bottom right values box. When you do that, your pivot table will now have a single value in it, the total number of cases that had a HEDIS follow-up. And the reason it's the sum is it's for every number, it automatically assumes you want the sum. So that's just the default. And let me just catch up with you guys. So insert pivot table. Okay. Now I find numerator, drag it down to values, and there I am. Sum of numerators 2577. And we already knew that from the previous page that there were 2,577 hospitalizations with a HEDIS follow-up. So we didn't really want the sum. Let's change it to something else. If you click the little drop down right next to in the value box where it says sum of numerator and hit value field settings.
Value field settings.
Choose, instead of sum, choose average. And while we're in here, let's actually name it something better. Because the average of a bunch of 1s and 0s is the rate, we can name it that. This is the FUH rate. This is how we're doing on that indicator. So hit average, rename it FUH rate, and then hit OK.
Hit OK.
And you should see the 53.19 and so on %, which is what we knew from the previous page.
Correct. Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot stand to see a percentage written in decimal format. It's just really hard on the eyes, I think. So we could have done this while we were still here, but I want to show you how to get back in too. And I also want to show you how ugly it was. So let's get back in there actually and change it. Go back to value field settings. So again, the way you do that is you click the drop down right next to FUH rate. And at the very bottom, it says number format. Click number format, and then in the next screen, select percentage. And then click OK, and now it's much better.
Okay.
You can actually drag as many variables or a variable as many times as you want into that values box. So see what happens if you take numerator and drag it down again. If you do that, you get that same default right out of the gate, sum of numerator. Let us change that to the count. So go to value field settings.
Count.
change it from sum to count, and change it to say the custom name number of hospitalizations, because that's what it is.
Okay.
And this little duo is exactly the kind of thing people always want to know on a data set like this. How many were in the pool? What's N? And what is our outcome? 4,844 hospitalizations, and the follow-up rate was 53%. So this is a lot of work for basically what we got on the previous page just by Control-Shift down arrow. The great part about pivot tables is that now you can slice and dice this super quick with very little effort. So as an example, suppose you want to see how this compares across affiliates. Go back into the fields list, find affiliate, and drag it down to the rows box. When you see this, you see those same two statistics, but this time it's by affiliate. And reading this, it looks like Lenaway's ahead of the game. You can drag a whole bunch of stuff down here. The next thing, grab CMH familiarity, which is just above numerator, and drag that one down to the rows box as well. And now you see the data laid out by affiliate and CMH familiarity.
Oh.
So this is what puts the pivot in pivot table, is that you can easily pull stuff out, put stuff in, change things around without really any effort at all, just to find the best configuration of the data to understand what's going on. And whenever I do an analysis, that's exactly what I do. I don't know how I'm going to set it up ahead of time. I have some idea, but basically I don't know. And I just start shifting stuff around in these boxes until it's telling me the story as clearly as it can. And that's the view that I give to people. And it's what you can do too. So let me just catch up with you. So I had numerator. This one is the count. Oops. And it was number of hospitalization. There. And this one was the average, and it was FUH rate. Number format is percentage. Okay. And I had affiliate down there and CMH familiarity there. So this is what I would do. If this were my analysis, I would go, okay, affiliate, then CMH. How about switching the order of that? Does this seem to tell the story better? Kind of, yeah, it does, because what I can see is that opened to a CMH ed admission that's a high rate, and it seems to be high in all the counties, and open to a CMH by the week after discharge that's really high, and it's really high in all the counties, and not open to a CMH, it's low, and it's low in all the counties. So I'm seeing a variable that seems to have a great influence on our rate. And that's basically what we want to know always, is what is the active ingredient? What is the thing that makes this rate go up? And I would say being in Lenaway and being open to CMH, if not before you were admitted, at least a week after discharge. These things get you a better rate of follow-up. And you could also move it to the value, to the columns box if you want it in wide format. There's so many different ways you could look at the data. And again, you just futz around with it until you get the clearest picture. There's no right answer.
Okay.
A nice little feature of pivot tables is if you're looking at it, and like, let's say Lenaway was looking at it, and Wendy does this all the time, like, I need to know who those are, please. She doesn't like anything to be dirty or messy. So if she wanted to know like who in Lenaway was not open to a CMH team after discharge, all you have to do is double click that 236, or you could have clicked the 28%, but one of these aggregates, double click it, And instantly a sheet will open and it'll list out all the records that went into that statistic. This will be 236 cases from Lenawee that were not open to a CMH after discharge.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Isn't that cool? Once you're done looking at it, you can right click that sheet and hit delete. It'll ask you if you mean it. Yes.
Yes. Okay, great.
Okay. We've talked about using grouping variables. Let's talk about filters. We already said, we noticed that there were a bunch of records in this data set that there was no discharge. And actually, I mean, forget about the messiness of the data. It doesn't even make sense to talk about a follow-up if there's no discharge. Follow-up after what? So what we've done so far is like, okay, but really we should be only doing this analysis on cases that were discharged. So what we're going to do is grab CSR discharge date and drag it down to the filters box.
CSR
Is our discharge date filters box. And then it's actually up at the pivot table level that you get to make your choice. Where it says all, you should see that in cell B1. Hit the down arrow, hit select multiple items, and then uncheck blank.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Do it again. Blank. Okay, so now you see the count went down and that you see something work. That makes sense. So there were actually only 4,632 hospitalizations in our data set that are going to be included in this analysis. But we still see that same pattern about it's much higher for those who were admitted to the CMH either before or after. Okay, exercise. So in this exercise, we're going to take this pivot table that we've already made. You don't have to make a brand new one. And you're going to manipulate it in the following way. You're going to still keep that filter on so that it gets rid of anybody who has a blank CSR discharge date. You're only going to show the FUH rate. So you're going to remove number of hospitalizations. And let me just quickly show you how to do that. You just click it and drag it out of there. You're going to remove number of hospitalizations by dragging it out of the values box. You're going to find discharge fiscal year and put it in the rows box. And you're going to find affiliate and put it in the columns box. And it'll look like this when you're done. So I'm just going to leave a minute for this, and then I'm going to go over how to do it. Okay, so this is how you would do that. It said affiliate needs to be in the column. So I'm going to, actually I could just take it right out of here and scoot it up to column. And it says discharge fiscal year is supposed to be the row. So I'm going to remove CMH familiarity, just like I did the other one, by just dragging it out. And I'm going to replace it with discharge fiscal year. Boom. And everybody should make sure that we're all on the same page here, that we've all got this because we need it for the next step. Are there any questions about this?
This is me. I'm still looking for the discharge.
Oh, it's the last one. Scroll all the way
Oh,
down.
it's the very last one.
And
Well,
here's,
no wonder.
here's another thing. If you're looking for something, if it's super, super, super long, you can just start typing. So DISC and
Okay.
it'll find it for you.
All right. So yeah, I'm all set.
Okay. So this is really nice and very precise. This is just the kind of thing I could picture sending to CPT. But the thing is, although it's precise, it lacks intuitiveness. People usually want the information served to them in graphical form, much easier to digest. So luckily, once you've got it in a pivot table, it's really just a no-brainer to instantly turn that into a chart. To do that, click anywhere inside the pivot table and then go to Insert, Recommended Charts.
Insert recommended chart.
When you do that, it's going to give you a whole bunch of options and it'll give you a preview of what the data would look like in all the different formats. And you could choose the one that seems best to you at the time. Let's just stick with column, clustered column, which is column and then the first choice. There we go. And what you instantly see here is what we knew before, which is Lenawee is ahead of the pack. And they have been for 3 years. Suppose we got to this point where we're like, you know what? I shouldn't have done a bar graph. I should have done a line graph or whatever. You could make a whole new graph if you want. Don't do this, just watch. You could just click back on there and again, go to Insert, Recommended Charts, and then choose what you want. And then you'd have two. But you could also change the one you've got if you want to. So to do that, right click anywhere on the graph and select Change Chart Type.
Oh, okay.
And then choose Line with Markers, which is line and then the fourth one over.
Okay.
And just
Yeah.
like we did with the tables, these are two different ways to look at the same picture and it's the same situation. You just go, which one is telling me a more clear story? A lot of times when a date or some sort of time is on the x-axis, people prefer line charts because not only does this tell me that, like, I can see Lenawee blue is above the other three all the time, but I can also see Lenawee's progress easily over time. It's connecting the dots, so Lenawee went up and then down, whereas the other guys just, pretty much just went strictly down. The bar chart might be better if it's like these are on top of each other. It's really hard to see Livingston, Monroe, and Washtenaw. But if you see the bar chart, that's maybe better for seeing the slight distinction between if they're sort of overlapping. And it says here, do you prefer one over the other? You don't need to say that out loud, but the whole idea is just mess around with the graphs until you see something that seems like it's telling the story clearly. Another really cool thing is you don't have to just have affiliate in there. You could be swapping out all sorts of other variables if you want to know if they have an influence on how well we're doing with follow-up. For example, if you drag affiliate, click on the pivot table again. And when you do, you'll get your pivot table fields back. Pull affiliate out of there and drag a different variable in, like, what did I have in there? CMH familiarity. If you pull that down. Okay, that looks like it's important. Look at how different those bars are. And it's always like that from year to year. Or you could pull CMH familiarity out and you could put in responsible CMH. That looks like it's important. because the bars are super different from each other, and it's like that every year. It's not a fluke. So this would be something that, like, if say a Victor or a CJ was trying to figure out what variables influence the follow-up, whether they get a follow-up or not, this would be that exercise right here, just dragging stuff in to the columns box one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, this exercise I think might be too hard to do it alone, so we're gonna do it together. But
Thank goodness.
huh?
I said, thank goodness.
Yeah, the person before you was like, ugh. Okay, so next exercise, make sure we're getting it. Again, we're gonna modify the pivot table we've got. We're not gonna make a whole new one. And this is what we're gonna do. We're still gonna be filtering out blank CSR discharge date. We're gonna make it so CMH familiarity is the row heading. So we're gonna put CMH familiarity in the rows box. We're not gonna put anything in the columns box. That's gonna be empty. And we're going to be calculating not only the FUH rate, which we've already got there, but to it, we're going to add FUH rate light, which is exactly what we did to get FUH rate, except we're going to use numerator light instead of numerator. And we're going to format it as a %. And it'll look like this when we're done. So here's how we do it. So we've already filtered up the way we want to be. It said CMH familiarity is a row heading. So I'm going to take out discharge fiscal year, just drag it out. I'm going to drag CMH familiarity down to the rows box. Then it's saying there's one thing missing. I'm supposed to have FUH rate light. So this is the real test. We're going to take numerator light, drag it down, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the numerator, which is hit the drop down, go to value field settings, change it to average instead of sum, change the custom column name to FUH rate light. And then under number format, we're going to make it a percentage. So numerator light, change sum to average, change the name to FUH rate light, change the number format to percentage. And then click OK. And now we see this story. Ugh, what just happened? Okay. So there's a couple of things that this illustrates. First of all, if you have more than one thing here in the values box, this thing called values shows up. You don't have to have any variable in the column box, the upper right. This values thing shows up, and you can move it around too. And the second thing it illustrates is just what story is this telling? So this red is the % that got a follow-up that wasn't HEDIS. And blue is the % that got a follow-up that was HEDIS compliant. Do you guys see what story this is telling? What I'm seeing is if they weren't open to a CMH team after discharge, this gap is really big. There's quite a few people that got a non-compliant service, but so they are getting a follow-up, not as much, but much more than it looks like. You're getting a service, but it's just not HEDIS compliant. So if I were in charge of this project, I'd be going, well, can we change the, how about giving them a different service? For the people who were opened up by a week after discharge, there's barely any difference. There's a little bit more of a difference for those who are already open. I don't know the answer to why it's like this, but it definitely makes me wonder why. A lot of times, the data set that you're using to create your pivot charts, it changes. Either maybe you rerun the Cricut report and you have new data for the week or the month, or you might just change something. If that's the case, you have to manually update this pivot table and chart. So let me show you an example of how that works. If you could flip back to the data set itself and just delete a chunk out of numerator light. It doesn't even matter. Just delete a few records. You would hope that the pivot table would automatically just know, oh, so change the chart. No, it doesn't. You have to do something to make it update. So this data set changed. Now go back to the pivot table. Right click anywhere on the pivot table and select refresh. It'll be kind of hard to see unless you deleted a ton. But when you do that, the FUH rate light will change. Let me just do that really quick. Deleting some. Then I go back and I right click and I hit refresh. See, it changed a little. So that probably will happen a lot. So for people who are not comfortable with formulas, that is the end of the training. There's one little sort of extra credit exercise though, that if you're not super into doing formulas, maybe just watch. But if you feel like you've written a zillion formulas and it's pretty easy for you to navigate this, then maybe do it along with me. But I want to just point out a best practice that we didn't use in the previous analysis. And that is, you can change the data set, the numerator, so that you don't have to use filters. It'll automatically filter out data. Here's what I mean. Z it to get everything back. This numerator is giving us a 0 even when the person has a blank discharge date. That's kind of not fair to say they didn't have a follow-up. They just shouldn't even be in the data set at all. This 0 is, in fact, not correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reformulate numerator so that if the CSR discharge date is blank, then the numerator will be blank too, and that'll automatically exclude it from the calculations. So if the CSR discharge is blank, then the numerator is blank. Otherwise, proceed as we had. The formula for doing that, I actually pasted into the meeting invite. If you want to, you could just copy it right out of the meeting invite and paste it in cell V3, replacing what's there. But let me just explain how this works. So we already had this. This is saying if FUH, if he does FUT has text, then 1, otherwise 0. I'm going to make a little qualifier before it even does that. I'm going to say, oh, whoa, before you get there, please. If K3 is blank, if is blank K3, and K3 is the discharge date. If the discharge date is blank, well, then I want a blank. Otherwise, then you can go through that little procedure. I just took what we had there and stuck it as an otherwise. And this is an example of what's called a nested if. And these can get hideous. And I hate them. And that's why I don't program in Excel. But if we have to, this is the best practice. Because if you're going to hand this data set off to somebody, it's very sort of a nuisance to be like, oh, and don't forget to filter out CSR discharge. This will automatically do it, so they will have no choice. So I'm going to just quick go in there. The way I do that is I give myself some room and I go if is blank, okay, K3, no, it's K3 because right there, see how it highlights it? Isn't that nice? If is blank K3, comma, then what do I want if that's true? I want it to be blank. In Excel, that's a double quote with nothing between. And then a comma. Otherwise, that thing I did, right, paren. Hit enter. I can find my little black cross and double click. And now my entire column is updated. And you can see that it does give me blank sometimes. That is what we wanted. It should be a blank every time the CSR discharge date is blank.
So it's okay to have spaces between your formulas?
Yeah, it doesn't see them. That big space
doesn't,
means
okay.
nothing. Yep.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, and it makes it easier on the eyes. In fact, you could even do this. Oh, you can't see that. It's on the next line.
Oh, okay.
Alt enter, but oops. So now I'm going to go back to my pivot table, and just so you can see how that worked, I'm going to remove the CSR discharge date from the filter. I no longer need that. If I right click and hit refresh, this gives me the same thing. If you remember back, this gives me the same thing I would get if I had the CSR discharge date filtered. It just does it automatically. So nobody can make the mistake of forgetting to filter the data. It's baked in. And this is a best practice. So that is truly the end of the training. Are there any questions?
No, I do not have any questions. I thought it was really, really enjoyable.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you did a really nice job, Jess. I think that the materials that you presented are really good. I think that the real world